welcome back to part 2 of Flowers from 1970 by this author on Wattpad. Go check him out. You should probably watch the first part first because then you're going to be really confused. Also, I'm supposed to say something like follow my YouTube. I'm not entirely sure though, but definitely check out my Twitch as well. Alright, let's get into this. Usually, when George waited on June to call him, he'd occupy himself with work. He had finished early though, so he had nothing to do, and no call to expect since Dream was going over to his sister's for a while, and was leaving the phone at home. He sat in silence in a room for a while before he decided to spend time outside. He'd not gone on a walk for a while, so he decided that would be best, also because he knew Dream would get mad at him for not using his free day wisely. He put on a hoodie, pocketed his phone, and shrugged downstairs, walking outside onto the porch. He checked the flowers, and as expected, nothing had yet grown. It was the scary part about growing flowers in the beginning. If you don't know, in the beginning, you don't know if anything is happening at all yet. He decided he'd go to the park. He brought a small notebook and pencil to sketch his surroundings, as he used to do with his mother when he was young. He got a sight of his swing set and found a bench close by. He sat down and sighed, started scratching lines in his notebook. "No, Tommy, I told you not to be mean and you didn't listen," George heard a woman say. He turned around and saw Sally scolding Tommy, who looked grumpy. "But I want ice cream like Tubbo. It's not fair," he cried, but his mom wasn't letting up. Sally pointed a finger at him. "I told you a million times, don't be mean to girls. What do? Call Kara Puffy," until she cried. Tommy's mouth gaped open. "She likes to be called that. It's her nickname, Mom." "Fine then," Sally said. "If it didn't make her cry, what did?" Tommy put his head down at the feet. "I chased her around with a stick and told her if I got close enough I'd poke her." Sally groaned. "Tommy, you can't go around doing that. She deserves," Sally finished. "Yes, that word," Tommy pleaded. "Why does she deserve it?" Sally tried to understand her son. Tommy waved his hands. "She's a girl." Sally sighed and turned away. She caught sight of George on the bench and waved. "Oh, hello. You talked to my husband the other day, I believe." George nodded. "Wilbur." "Yes." He smiled at her and then gestured toward Tom, but his arms crossed and flared up his nose when he looked at him. "So that little man is still in trouble, I see." Wilbur was walking with Tubbo towards them now. Tubbo looked at Tommy. "Here, Tommy, we can split it." Tommy was trying to pretend mad, but eventually gave in as Tubbo gave him some of the ice cream. Wilbur's eyes glanced at Sally and George, talking. "George," he explained, "pleasure to see you here." "Hello, Wilbur," he greeted. How was it meeting with your father?" Wilbur thought for a second. "Quite odd. He constantly refuses to come here, but suddenly when he got a call saying he's on a flight to Florida and get the guest room ready." "Dinner go well, then?" Wilbur nodded. "I'd say so." Tommy was a bit shy and weary of him at first, but he warmed up to him when he protected Tommy from Uncle Techno. George smiled. Seemed like a good time. Wilbur shook his head with a grin. "We don't even have a guest room." He rolled his eyes. "He took Sally and I's room and made us sleep in Tommy's." "Sounds like a very old person thing to do," George told him. They both shared a laugh. Wilbur watched George closely, almost as if he were waiting for a certain reaction, but found nothing. "Oh," Wilbur saw George's book and pencil. "May I borrow your pencil for a moment?" George nodded and handed him the pencil. Wilbur took out his pocket notebook and scratched a few lines before returning it. "Thank you." George took the pencil. "No problem. What brings you to the park?" Wilbur turned to Sally and then back to George and whispered, "In all honesty, escaped from my father." "He that bad?" George said. Not necessarily," Wilbur explained. "He lives in England. Obviously, I'm Brit and born there, but he wasn't. Anyways, it's too long for a story. Basically, he's moody because he's old and because of jet lag." Actually thought about how funny it is. Us Brits ended up in neighborhood a couple houses from each other in Florida," George joked. "Yeah, well," he had a spoon of ice cream. "Dad brought a house here, said Florida's fun. I mean, who say no to a house?" George was giving what Wilbur said some thought, then suddenly out of nowhere, Techno came walking up towards them, pulling at his hair. "You come here to escape too, Techno?" Wilbur grinned. Techno rolled his eyes. He keeps wanting me to fight him," he complained. An old man wanting to fight me. Dad and his old friend used to come over and teach us how to fight. We'd fence, kickbox, you name it." George let out a breath of laughter. "Sounds like quite the man." "That he is," Techno said plainly as he picked up an ice cream cup from the table. "Oh, Techno," Sally said. Techno turned towards her. "That's Tubbo's ice cream. He left it there to go play with Tommy." "So I'm stealing from a child?" Techno questioned. "That makes it so much better." George thought he actually was going to steal the ice cream, and then he put it down and sat at the table part next to the bench. "So, Techno, you're American, but I assume you and Wilbur are brothers?" Techno nodded. "Got used to the country, I guess." "It's an impressive American accent," George complimented. "Yeah, well, I do because it sounds better than my British one," Techno admitted with a shrug. "Sally, are you sure Tubbo doesn't want this ice cream?" "Let it alone, Techno," Sally scolded, and Techno sighed in defeat. He couldn't win against her. There was vibration coming from the bench, and George checked his phone, but it wasn't his. "It's not mine that's ringing. I reckon it's yours." Wilbur checked his back pocket, and indeed it was his phone ringing. "Oh, it's Dad." Techno glanced over. "What does the old man want this time?" he said plainly.
Wilbur answered, and George could hear a faint mumbling. Mm-hmm. Wilbur said, yes, I have, Dad. No, that's tomorrow, not today. How do I know? Dad, you're the one who wrote down the date down. How do you not know? Alright, that's fine. Bye, Dad. Techno raised his eyebrows. He was just checking on where we went. He said it was a mistake, leaving him alone in the house. Oh no, what did he do to the house? Sally said. We'll have to see, Wilbur sighed. We're going to head home now, George. I'm a bit scared as to what he's done to the house. Maybe if we get there early enough, we can prevent more damages. George laughed. Alright then, it's getting late. I should probably head home as well. Wilbur smiled. Sounds good. Have a nice evening, George. You and your family as well. George waved them goodbye. The weather seemed to be cooler than usual, in contrast to the bright sunlight. He planned to stay in his room for a bit in case Dream called, but after a while he got hungry and walked outside to make himself some toast and butter with tea. He got back to the room to eat there, and the phone rang as he walked through the door. He shuffled quickly, putting the mug and the tea and toast on his work desk to answer the phone. George, Dream greeted. I just got home. How are you? George took a bite of his toast. Fine, I went to the park yesterday and it was pretty fun. Met up with Wilbur and his family again. A brother called Techno. Techno, Dream repeated. I have a close friend nicknamed Techno. George drank some of his tea. It's a cool coincidence. I don't know if your Techno is as outlandish as the Techno here. Dream laughed. Oh yes, he is. Not lately though. He's had cancer for a while. He's been fighting. George frowned. I'm so sorry. I'm sure he'll do okay. I am too. Dream smiled. Anyways, I'm interrupted a bit there. How was the park? George thought for a moment. Well, I didn't stay for long, but I do think they're a bunch of fun people I'd consider friends. Dream smiled. I'm glad you're making friends. I know you said you hardly had any. Well, you're my friend, Dream reminded him. George reminded him, sorry. Dream was silent. I mean, a friend from your time, you know? Dream sighed. You're right. I didn't mean like that, Dream softened. You're one of my most important friends. The only other friend that I feel a connection with, other than Sapnap. You said you went to the park yesterday, Dream asked after a while, to break any tension. Yeah. The 29th, Dream asked to make sure. Yes, George replied. Why do you ask? Dream was silent. I don't know. Just to make sure we're still in the same month and day. Yeah, George let out a breath of laugh. We're just off. We're a bit off on the year. Dream shook his head with a smile. A bit. George heard scribbling from Dream's side of the phone. Are you drawing? Dream hesitated. No, I'm writing. What are you writing? Dream asked intrigued. Just some stuff, was all Dream could say. And George hummed in response. How's helping your sister? George wanted to hear all about Dream's day, especially since they didn't get the chance to talk the night before. It was pretty fun, he admitted. She's quite annoying, but she's like a mini me, so I can't blame her. Wow, a girl Dream. Scary. She could be scary, Dream said gleefully. She was going to punch me in the face for holding her diary and asking what it was. She does karate, too. Well then, you shouldn't touch diaries, George said sassily. Ha ha. Dream went quiet. I missed you. It was the only day, but I missed talking to you, if that doesn't sound weird. George's eyes widened a bit, unsure how to respond. He thought it was best just to be honest. I missed you too. Yeah, well, me being gone got you out of the house, right? Dream brought up with a smile. He noticed how much more open George was to be less isolated lately. He knew how much he was committed to work more than the simple things in life. So it was a nice change. George leaned against the wall, finishing his last piece of toast. Yeah, haven't done that in a while. Are you saying I should disappear more often? Dream joked, trying in a trying voice. No, George answered loudly, then cleared his throat. I just meant it's good to get a bit of sunlight every few days. I only went outside because I didn't have any more work to do. You just want me gone, Dream said, pushing jokingly. I'm an old man anyways. What can I do for you, life? What? Stop joking, Dream said seriously. You've done much for my life, more in 1 month than most people have in years. Dream was taken aback by the serious and heartfelt response in his stupid joke. So have you, George. You don't even know. George had his eyes closed, headphones on, laying on his bed. He was listening to Flightless Bird, American Moth by Iron and Wine, and though he normally listened to songs and different genre than this, he continued to put these songs on repeat. He felt emotions he'd never felt before and suddenly reeled in by the careful construction of the melodious sounds. For a boy whose life was run by focus and set goals, he had not been used to being so driven off course by a turn of events he could not explain. He believed there was science to everything. He knew that if he tried hard enough, everything he had ever known could be solved with numbers and quiet genius. He had been a firm believer in the construct of everything he knew from being another number. Life was data. Everything he'd ever committed to himself had been data. His job, daily routines, his whole life were just another algorithm he knew was solvable on pen and paper. So why had a phone call suddenly thrown all of his beliefs down a waterfall of madness? He could have been clinging to one person in his life that had ever given a damn about him, but he felt something more. Amidst the impossibility and outlandish circumstances was an emotion that was formed simply by exchanging words on a device connected by a rip in the timeline. He wasn't going to run to a scientist to get an explanation or post about the miracle that was this old telephone to show the world that he discovered some sort of magic. It was almost like he wanted Dream to himself. This bond was strictly made for them, that the world wasn't meant to know. Dream's voice threw the logic down the drain, along with all of his crap about the scientific proof and algorithm nonsense. Been the magnet pull that he needed to realize how much he had messed up his life, his relationships, and every decision he had ever made, all to help himself. So he lay there wondering why one entity in his life that had been seemed to fix him was someone he couldn't have. What he wanted to dream as, he wasn't sure. He never had a friendship in which he'd find it safe to spill his inner demons in exchange for words of comfort and honest criticism. George and Dream had made a schedule in which Dream would call at 8 p.m. every night, and even earlier on the weekends. Dream would glance at the clock, squinting to see he thankfully had 2 more long minutes to wait before he'd hear the saving grace that was the phone ringing. 3 minutes had gone by, though George knew that not every call was going to be on the dot. He felt a little bit lonely and worried. 10 minutes went on, then 30, then an hour and a half. He had a knock on his door, just about to give up and waiting and make dinner. He placed a small figurine on the phone so if it rang, it would shake and the figure would fall, and if George came back and the figure was on the floor, he'd known if Dream had called while he was gone. He forced himself downstairs quickly, not wanting to miss the call in case one came. He opened the door to see Wilbur in his usual pocket notebook in hand, and Sally holding a bottle of apple cider. "Wilbur, Sally," he greeted. "What brings you here at 8 at night?" He gestured to the presents in the bottle of cider. Wilbur wrote down his notebook. Wilbur wrote in the notebook and stuffed it in his pocket. "Well, it's been a while since we had friends to have chat and drink with, so we figured knock on the door of our fellow Brit to see if he was available." George hesitated for a bit, a little weary of leaving the phone in the event and Dream calling, but Wilbur and his family had been so kind it's hard to say no. "I'd love to." "That's lovely." Sally smiled before the couple were just inside. "I adore your house. It has such a vintage feel." George looked around. Only she knew. "It's sort of vintage. Nothing's changed in this place since the 60s or 70s, I assume." Wilbur nodded. It seemed so. He was looking around before spotting the painting. "Birth of Venus," he said. "I didn't know you were a fan of art. That is such a beautiful place. Piece." "That isn't something I bought," George corrected. "It came with the house, actually. But it was cool. Quite cool that you know the name of it." Wilbur turned towards him. "We used to have one in our old family house. My parents admired the artist. They sat on the couch and George had played a movie for them to watch." "Who's taking care of little Tommy?" George asked. "My father and Techno, initially. But Techno wanted to come with us here." "He's welcome here if he'd like," George suggested. "You give him a call and invite him. The more the merrier." George felt like he was getting carried away. But he liked the idea of having friends, even enough that his worries with the lack of phone call from Dream from the night had subsided. Sally opened the cider and pulled Coaster's glasses out of her purse she had brought herself. "Are you sure? I do hope we didn't interrupt you in anything." George shook his head. "No worries," he assured her. "My plans got cancelled for the night, so this is actually a good substitute." Wilbur tilted his head. "What were your plans initially?" he questioned, accepting a glass of cider from Sally and taking a sip, being sure to put the coaster under his chin so he didn't spill anything in George's house. George scratched his head awkwardly. "I was going to talk to an old friend, but he turned out to have last-minute plans." He tried his best to be truthful, but not entirely. Wilbur nodded slowly. He took a sip of the cider and started clicking his pen frantically, patting his jacket or something. "Dear," Sally touched his shoulder. "Saw you put it in your jeans pocket." Wilbur checked his jean pocket and pulled out his notebook. "Thought I lost it." George finally had the courage to ask, "What's in the notebook?" "You don't have to tell me. I just see you with it all the time." Wilbur seemed to think about his answer for a second. "It's a planner. I think that's the best way to describe it." George understood. It makes sense. Sorry if it was an intrusive question. No, no, Wilbur waved his hands. "I'd be curious as well. I never let it out of my sight." Wilbur seemed like a simple man, a father with a stable family and a seemingly good job. But deeper inside was a mysterious man that he felt hid something deeper. Everyone had that, of course, but Wilbur seemed to harness that energy the most out of everyone George knew. Then again, he didn't know many people. There was a knock on the door. That must be Techno, Wilbur assumed, and then George made his way to open it. Techno stood there with his trench coat and usual boots and rings. He was an intimidating person, and if he were Tommy, he'd be scared of him as well. He walked in. "Will, Tommy's asleep. He fell asleep to Dad telling him the stories of his adventure. Remember those? Wilbur looked reminiscently. Yeah, we'd beg him for more stories, and he'd tell us he wouldn't continue if we didn't sleep. Then, the next night, we'd have the next part. But some of them obviously weren't true, Techno said as he sat down. Hello, by the way, George. What's up, Techno? George greeted. Watching as Techno waved to Sally, Wilbur scoffed. Of course they were true. He's not that good of an actor or a lawyer, and with the way he told those stories, I knew he'd lived through them. Techno rolled his eyes. Wilbur, you believe those stories and you're an adult man. He shook his head, very visibly disappointed. I knew those were fiction when I was 6. Wilbur looked at George. He's just a non-believer, he whispered. I heard that, Harry Potter. He scolded Wilbur, and Sally and the rest of them laughed while Wilbur gave the death stare and pushed his glasses up his face. What kind of stories were there? Were they? George asked, not specifically one to the two brothers, but whoever would answer. Techno held up his hand, counting fingers. There was one jumping a fence at the city zoo, petting a leopard, one of him wrestling a gator, and he found in the sewers. Wilbur, you couldn't possibly believe the one about him. Him what? Him what? Him what? I need to know. Wilbur stopped him suddenly. All right, he laughed awkwardly. Techno, we get it. I'm serious. Techno put his hands. I'm just saying. Wait. It's absurd how you could be 36 and believe the story is true. Even if Tommy go to Dad's face and tell him it's fake, and he's 6. George didn't want to ask too many questions, so he didn't ask what the story was. Instead, he tried to break the tension between the two brothers. So Tommy's getting pretty close to him now, isn't he? Wilbur nodded, giving him a thumbs up. Tommy loves him, he answered, then suddenly remembered something. Oh, Techno, imagine if he met Dad's best friend. They would have gotten along so well. Techno looked down, unfamiliar look of sadness on his face when he turned to George. Our dad used to teach us to fight with, passed away a couple months ago. Dad called us absolutely devastated. They were really close. Tommy would love to bicker with him. George took everything in. They seemed to grown up so happily around friends and family that made life fun enough to have stories to share around. George's fear was that they'd ask about his childhood and he'd have nothing to respond with. They'd finished the movie, sharing a few more stories before Wilbur thought it'd be a good idea for them all to go home. It was a good night, George. Thank you for having us over when we basically came to your house uninvited. Oh no, please don't start with that, George smiled. It was nice to share some company after a while. Anytime, Wilbur grinned, before writing on a piece of notebook, ripping it out. Here's our phone number if you ever want to all hang out again. Just give us a call and we'll be there. We'll be here. Techno walked towards George, his boots heavy against the hard floor. Stay safe, cool brother. He patted him on the shoulder before walking out. Sally had kindly taken to cleaning up all the glasses and coaster, which didn't make them a mess thanks to her, and bid George a goodbye. When George shut the door, he ran upstairs to check the phone, but the small toy sitting on top of the phone was perfectly balanced on top of it. It had been nearly midnight, and I thought it was best to go to sleep and hope the dream would call the next day. The absence of distraction in the form of Wilbur and his family opened his mind to endless thoughts he'd been thinking earlier. He had once again been played Flightless Bird, American Moth on his headphones and fell asleep, and occupy only if what ifs and imagines in his full head. It was 7:58 and the phone was ringing. George had woken from his nap, but had gone a bit longer than he initially planned. He slept an entire day? Hey, I like Cars 2. Then watch Cars 2 with me. Okay, Mia. Next, I think Sunday we should have a movie night and just stream Cars 2. That's all I'm saying. Star X Lightning McQueen. Please. Okay. George had woken from his nap, but had gone a bit longer than he initially planned, and ran and picked up. Dream, he explained, a little too enthusiastic than normal. He normally greet. He'd almost knocked the phone over because he tugged on the cord a little bit too much. There was a small scuffling before Dream responded. Hello, George, he sat down. I'm sorry I didn't call yesterday, if you got worried. Sapnap just went through this horrible breakup with his girlfriend of 2 years. I was over his place trying to soothe his troubles. George never known what it was like to have the heart broken, mostly because he never met someone to break it. He fidgeted with the phone cord before he pulled on the small table with the phone closer to him. How's he holding up? He asked. I know romantic pain can have quite lasting effects. Dream sniggered a little, which confused George as to what he found funny. Quite lasting effects, Dream mimicked in a horrible impression of a British accent. I like that. Anyway, he's out of the best place for now, but he's a tough guy. He'll get out of it soon. The girl was a big jerk anyways. George had seen his own roommate Alex go through a breakup once. He had been in a rightful mess and had eaten and slept well for weeks. He saw the cost of love if it didn't work out, and it could change even the strongest and happiest of people. Of course, George didn't get why it affected him so badly, or why it was something ever worth crying over. Alex had pulled off the beanie in his head and collapsed into the gray, tattered sofa. He threw the beanie across the room and tugged his hands forcibly through his hair. She made a promise to me, you know. She made me promise, you know. She made so many promises, and I was the one who was weary of them. But you know what? I promised anyways. He looked to George, whose eyes were like lasers on his crumbling friend. She made me promise, and she goes ahead and becomes one to break them. Why make promises if you can't keep them? It's bull. George was a bit scared to approach him in such a fragile state, but he picked up his cat Luca off the sofa onto the floor and sat down next to Alex. He tried to begin. I'm sorry, but I don't understand how you can be so angry at her for that, but still love her at the same time. I'd expect you to be more cautious of feeling anything for her again. You don't understand, George, Alex sniffled and began to wipe his nose with the jacket. But George quickly leaned to grab some tissues from the box in the center of the table in front of them. Thank you, said he took the tissues from George. Being mad at someone you love is almost always never enough for you to stop loving them. You can't spend so much of your time building a home for someone in your heart just to evict them all in 10 seconds. George nodded, but still couldn't bring himself to understand. If I were you, I'd just try to forget about her. That doesn't happen right away, Alex explained. It takes time. Trust me, George. One day you'll realize how much of a villain time can be. What do you mean? You can only go so long without having been hurt by love. When you're older, you'll experience it all for the first time. You'll get hurt more. You're not used to it. You don't know what to do. You don't know who to blame. Everyone's just going to tell you time heals all wounds, but in your head, you're just thinking, all time does is throw salt on them. You feel all these things more because you've never hurt before. You'll become so angry at the person who did this to you because they're the first to have done so. Alex tried his best to let out while tears still fell on his face. George felt horrible. He was supposed to be the supportive friend, but Alex was the one helping him, as if he was the one who just got heartbroken. George promised himself to remember Alex's words, to be prepared. He would prove that all you need to do to let the pain subside was to forget about time. Time did heal all wounds, but he wouldn't let anything wound him. George, did you hang up? Dream had broken through his wall of thoughts, and he immediately shook his head. No, I'm here, he responded, letting a heavy breath while he held in his chest come out. I hope Sapnap realizes she was a jerk and moves on. Dream agreed with a chuckle. So do I, George. He pulled open the curtains to let the shine of the streetlights onto the bedroom floor. Did you work yesterday when I didn't call? Were you worried? I didn't really worry, George said, not very truthfully. Well, I did, but I didn't know. But I know you have a life and you can't spend every night on the phone with someone from the future. Well, when you put it like that, Jim chortled, I quite enjoy talking to you. I'd happily spend every night on the phone for someone from the future. George didn't know why that sentence stung so badly in his chest, but he ignored the feeling and gave a weak laugh. And you say I'm the one who can't get enough of you. Dream put his chin on his hand. Just know, George, that I'm not a very good liar, so when I said that, he could hear his smile through the phone and roll his eyes. He wished Dream was next to him so he could slap him on the shoulder just for saying such a bold thing. You want me to be obsessed with you so bad. I do. I want you to join the club. There's plenty of others that are, Dream joked bravely. But never mind my fan club, how are you? George contemplated his answer for a bit. Not much, honestly. I waited for your calls for a bit, though. Dream sighed and gave a defeated sigh. I truly am sorry. Sapnap gets hit harder than most with this kind of stuff. So it's sort of an emergency. I got home at like 3 in the morning and didn't want to potentially wake you. Good decision, Dream told him. I'm not a fun person when woken up. Dream cackled manically. Now, I know what to do to drive you up the wall. Expect calls in the wee hours of the morning from now on. George let go of the phone cord he was wrapping around the finger because he absentmindedly cut off some of his circulation. If you do that, Dream, you'll what? Dream tested. You'll come over to my house and beat me up? Oh wait, you're already in my house. Might I even add our situation, which we get separated by? George wanted to bang his head on the table. You're so sassy. You're sassier than my sister, and that's saying something. Not alliteration, Dream complimented, angering George even more, rolling off the tongue nicely, all those S's. Just shut up already, George begged. He was finding everything quite amusing, and Dream could tell. What are you up to right now? Dream was sitting on his stool, shaking his leg, wondering whether I should take time to organize my cassettes or leave them in a heaping mess as they are now and go to sleep. George smiled when Dream said cassettes, as he knew music worked a different way than it did now. Sure, it was accessible, but not nearly as much as it is in his time. I'll say you organize them if you have a lot. Dream eyed the 4 baskets full of cassettes and erased his eyebrows. Organize them it is, he decided, but I'll do it tomorrow instead. This might take a whole day. Alright, George said quietly. What are you going to do instead then? Dream caught sight of his Les Paul in the corner of the room and made a grab for it. I reckon I can practice guitar. I learned this new song the other day. Ooh, George melted a little when Dream mentioned he'd play guitar. He'd always wanted to get better at himself and found people who could play instruments interesting. May I hear? Dream hesitated but agreed. I'm not the best, but I'll try. It's going to be a softer version though, since I think it fits the song better. He cleared his throat and George leaned closer to listen to the phone. Dream strung chords. Well, my love, my darling, I hunger for your touch. A long, lonely time. Dream was surprised at how beautiful Dream's singing voice was. He knew the song because of his grandpa, but agreed the song did sound better when it was sung softly, or just in a general preference in Dream's voice. And as time goes by slowly, and time can do so much more, are you still mine? George listened on, closing his eyes, imagining Dream sitting cross-legged on the floor with the phone near him, strumming his guitar in his echoey bedroom, in the same bedroom he was in now. The thought that Dream had sat in the same place he was now, singing him, sent him tingles through his body. Lonely river flows to the sea, to open arms of the sea. Yeah. Lonely river sigh, wait for me, wait for me. I'll be coming home, wait for me. George took in the lyrics. He never actually cared to listen to what the song was saying. He regretted never doing so. The words were so bittersweet and desperate that he could almost hear himself saying them. I need your love. God speed your love to me. There was silence after Dream strummed the last chord. Are you there? George turned to the phone. Yeah, just wow, I didn't expect that. I thought you were going to say I suck, wasn't I? Dream teased. No, George explained. I mean, your speaking voice is different from your singing voice. It's softer and fits the song. Also, your guitar playing is really good. Thank you, Dream said as he put his guitar back in the stand in the corner. I messed up the last few times, but other than that, I really liked that song. I really like this song. I've had it on repeat lately, and I learned the chords by myself. What's the song called, Dream? George asked, yawning slightly. Unchanged Melody by the Righteous Brothers. George took his cell phone and made to add the song to the playlist when he realized it didn't fit any of the existing ones. He instead created a new one and calling it Flowers from 1970, in reference to Dream, and added the song to that. He also made a mental note to find more songs to fit the playlist. He'll play it out loud for Dream on the phone someday when he considered it finished. I tried the guitar. It's really hard, George said, putting down his cell phone. That's quite impressive, especially since that you learned it yourself. Dream was glad that George admired his playing and singing. No one knew he did so, not even Sapnap. He just told Sapnap that he had the guitar as a gift but never played, and secretly he spent hours in his room practicing for hours on end. Having someone hear the results of his hard work and find it impressive meant a lot to him. Are these kinds of songs still a thing? Dream asked, or is that something else you think you shouldn't tell me? George thought for a moment. Well, I know of them, so do a good amount of people, but other than that, they're not really playing everywhere much anymore. Jim found that a little interesting, especially since his parents just adored Beach Boys, and he made sure he and his sister knew every song. Bummer, they're quite good. I don't think I know much discovery from your time, but you can make a list of songs and try to listen to, and I'll educate myself even more, Dream offered. And Dream's heart warmed at how George became interested in one of his favorite artists. I will soon, but unfortunately now I'm sleepy and think I should turn in for the night, Dream yawned loudly. Good night, Dream. George felt empty after saying that, but he knew he had more nights to talk to him and that he shouldn't be possessive over his time. Good night, George, Dream replied. And don't forget to check on those flowers, he added. George smiled before hanging up the phone, laying on his bed. He made this playlist he made for Dream on repeat, which only included one song, so he fell asleep to the song on repeat. Dream could have taken advantage of George's call. He could ask for the winners of future sports games and bet on them to become rich. He could ask for the secrets of the future and use them for personal gain. What did Dream want? All he wanted was to talk to George. Given the opportunity to speak to someone over 50 years ahead of him, and all he wanted to do was talk to a lonely boy who never had anyone to care about him the way he did. Dream never had intentions that helped himself. Maybe in the beginning, his curiosity led to longing for more answers, but after getting to know George, all of that disappeared and was replaced by what he saw as a beautiful friendship. These phone calls were their little secrets, their few hours in the dark and gloomy nights to relax and be themselves to someone who would comfort and laugh with them. It was something both of them had gotten used to. George had woken up groggily, having slept in an uncomfortable position all night. He made to check the time on his phone, but realized it had died due to the song playing on his phone during the night. He groaned and got up, almost falling over, but catching himself on time. He decided to get breakfast and go for a walk since it was such a nice day outside. It'd be perfect since his phone would be charged in that time. After eating a couple leftovers and brushing his teeth, he ran back to his room, up to his phone, unplugging it before going back downstairs. Sun was newly risen and illuminating the neighborhood in such a way that everyone who took the time to step outside would consider it a perfect day. George continued his usual routine of checking the planted flowers. Patting the soil, nothing yet, I guess, he told himself, sighing before getting up and walking across the newly sprinkled grass, water slightly seeping through materials of his shoes, but not enough to get him thrown off the course of a good day. No plans had been made, and George was going nowhere in particular. He decided it was better to walk than drive, because his cardio had been awful and something he needed to work on. Town Square was close enough walk that it was bearable, but also far enough to get some good exercise. There was various shops and restaurants, including Carl's flower store. In fact, George had not been back into town since he'd gone to Carl's store. It was a 15-minute walk, and he took his time because he liked listening to songs during the walk. So he'd walk to the beat of music, which in this case were slower. Once he'd arrived, he had not been hungry, so he skipped over to the small cafes and fast food places and explored the stores he had never seen before. It was an old sort of run-down arcade that still attracted lots of kids and adults who longed for a hint of nostalgia. Shops for tea that had free taste testing, which George had a blast in, and other hidden gems which George had never known about. While he was walking, he had stepped on a piece of gum on the floor. He made a disgusted face as he lifted up his shoe, and the gum stretched over the concrete with it. He kicked the shoe on the pavement, attempting to peel it off. After successfully cleaned his shoe, he looked up and saw a small door to his left. He would have never seen it if he hadn't stopped in front of the door. It was a bookstore, with paint on its window missing some letters due to peeling. George was immediately drawn to it, walking mindlessly as the cowbell rang when the door opened. It was bigger than what he expected after seeing it from the outside. There were aisles that housed not only books, but music as well, including records, cassettes, and CDs. The only thing that caught his eye, though, was who was behind the counter, and it was Techno. He was bagging a book for a customer, thanking them for the purchase, and after seeing a child, he included a sheet of stickers and a bookmark. His true colors were showing. He didn't really hate children. George walked over confidently, and Techno didn't notice him until he was right in front of the counter. He was still toying with the cash register, looking down. "Hello." Techno looked up and saw George. "George, I've never seen you here before." George looked around, eyebrows raised. "Well, I've never been here before." Techno nodded. "I know. I usually get the same customers, and I know all of them by now, so seeing you here is a surprise." George eyed the shelves behind the counter, promoting new arrivals and the books whose stocks were low. On the bookstand was a book called Art of War, most proudly displayed in the center of the top shelf. "So you work here, that's a cool thing." Techno chuckled lightly. "I own this place," he clarified, and George was shocked and impressed at the same time. Techno's appearance had never gave off an energy that implied he worked in such a place. "How did you get it?" George asked. "Did you buy it yourself?" The pink highlighted man shook his head. The fang earring hanging down his left ear jingled as he did so. "I want a fang earring. I want a fang earring." "Dad owned it," he explained, gesturing to the big store around him. "Wilbur was never one for reading books, but I was an English major, and he knew I did, so he left it to me after he retired instead." The people in George's life never failed to surprise him. Who would have thought this intimidating man was an English major who ended up owning a bookstore? He never knew how lovely it was to ask and get to know people for the first time. "Business seems well. That's quite impressive." "It's steady, yeah," Techno shrugged. "I'm saving up money for a few things while trying to keep this place running." "Saving up for what?" George inquired curiously. "A new computer for Tommy. He spilled Coke on it. Wilbur's been needing help with money for buying a car, so that's something too." And he hesitated. "A plane ticket." George found how sweet it was for the first few options for purchases involved Wilbur and Tommy, but wanted to learn more about the plane ticket. "Plane ticket. Do you want to go on vacation?" "No." Techno played with the cash register some more. "I have a close friend I've been planning on visiting. He's my best friend, but he doesn't live here." George, his eyebrows up and down with a smile. "Do they live nearby?" "Ha!" Techno laughed. "Not even close. If Techno knew how much George related to him, both someone they cared about lived far away from them. The only difference was all Techno had to do was buy a plane ticket, while George's situation was a bit more complicated than his. "I hope it works out for you then, Techno." George turned around to check if there was customers waiting in line, in case he'd been clogging it up. After seeing no one, he added, "I'll go look for some books. I've been meaning to start reading more." Techno agreed and proceeded to help the customer that had just arrived. George picked up 2 books that had piqued his interest and made to pay them when he saw the cassette aisle. He walked over, checking them out. He had no cassette player, but knew dreamlike cassettes, so he wanted to see what they had in stock. He pulled some out. There was some by Elvis Presley, Doris Day, and also every Beatles and Beach Boy album. When he reached the R letters section, he pulled out each cassette, reading the names until he reached one with no design, Unchanged Melody by the Righteous Brothers, plus more, written in thick black pen on a white label. George was giddy. "Devil X Dust X, thanks for the follow. Thank you. Welcome to the chaotic galaxy. Welcome." George was giddy, and though he did not own anything that could play the cassette, he decided to purchase it anyways to tell Dream about it later. Once again, he met Techno at the counter, who counted up his total price. "You forgot this," George told him, pushing the cassette towards him. Techno picked it up, eyeing it. "Good choice," he told George. "Haven't heard this in a while." "You've heard it." "If you're talking about this particular tape, then yes," Techno nodded, handing it back to him. "I've heard every song on it. Lots of records and cassettes are our own stock." George took the tape back. "You forgot to charge me," he chuckled. Techno shrugged. "Nah, take it. We've had a hard time getting cassettes out since people don't buy them anymore. You're the first person in months." George smiled and thanked the man. He took his stuff and waved goodbye. Techno gave a salute with 2 fingers as he walked out the door. Later that night, George sat on his bed, reading one of the new books he had purchased. The phone was kept plugged in and close by, waiting out the last few minutes before Dream was scheduled to call. He only got a paragraph of the chapter he was on before the phone started ringing. George looked around for everything he could use to mark his place in the book. Dog earring pages had always been a pet peeve of his. He found an old food receipt and stuck between the pages before making to answer the phone. George, how's my favorite guy from 2020? Dream greeted him, a voice a little raspy. George furrowed a brow and thought. Are you talking to me? He asked sarcastically to make Dream laugh. Don't remember having talked to anyone else from 2020 lately, so I assume so. They both chortled a bit before settling down. They talked about each other's day. Dream spoke about how he managed to argue the kid he was coaching out of suspension and getting the rival team some sort of punishment, resulting in getting cussed at by a few angry parents as he walked past them with his head high, paying them no mind while spitting his baseball bat. Are you actually that confident? George questioned him skeptically, and Dream scuffed. You said it yourself, he shrugged. I'm so full of myself. Don't forget me mentioning how obsessed you are with me, George added, and Dream was a little surprised at his newfound confidence. Yeah, Dream let out a small breath. Where would this old man be without you? He pushed the joke, knowing it's the best way to respond without seeming too weakened by the statement. George caught sight of the cassette tape he had bought on his desk. Oh, Dream, he said. I found a cassette of the song you sang last night. Oh, Dream was interested. Play it out loud. George scratched the back of his head awkwardly. Yeah, I actually don't have anything to play it with. Dream was silent for a moment. Would you like a Walkman? He asked. I have an extra one still in the box. I reckon it can survive 50 years, right? I don't know, George said truthfully. Buried in the backyard, sitting through 50 years worth of sprinklers and rain? Dream came up with an idea. I have an idea, but it involves ruining a few walls. George made a sound indicating he was tired of all the wall ruining, when in reality he didn't mind. What is it? George heard knocking on the phone. It seems pretty thick. Maybe I can cut out a little place to keep a box in. I can also use it to send you more items as well. George sighed. Alright, try. Dream took out a red Swiss Army knife and pulled out a small blade, cutting through the wall and coughing through the dust that emerged. George watched as cracks appeared in the wall, right next to the sketch of his face. Nothing has been changed since 1970, but most of the items were either stolen or taken with last people who lived in the house, presumably Dream, so leaving stuff out wouldn't have worked. Dream had successfully cut a square into the wall, and surprisingly the inside was hollow and full of old insulation. He looked under his bed and found the Walkman box, putting it into the space covering up the wall again. Done, he announced. George made to push the wall open, but realized the cracks had grown enough mold to seal it shut again. He knocked on it before punching it repeatedly. Whoa there, Dream said through the phone. You alright? Yeah, George punched again. I just need to. Yes. The square cutout of the wall had fallen through. George was met with a cloud of dust and smell that was quite foul. He bravely put his hand in the space and patted the air until he found the old box. The box was dirty, but when he opened it, its contents were mint condition. It was crazy. Things could survive 50 years. Thank you, Dream. No problem, George. Dream smiled. Do you know how to use it is the question. No. George eyed the device, trying to figure it out. It was quite embarrassing how much knowledge he lacked in old technology. Dream had walked him through how to use it until George finally got the tape and pressed play. The first few seconds of unchanged melody, but he was more curious as to what the songs in the tape were. He asked Dream how to skip songs, and after being taught, he skipped. He held it up to the phone, and the first few notes of the song started to exert from the Walkman. I Will by the Beatles, Dream explained. I've been meaning to add to the tape. I love that song. I will wait a lonely lifetime if you want me to. I will, he sang. And George let the song play until the end since Dream enjoyed it so much. They had listened to each and every song on the tape with Dream knowing most of them and singing along. George enjoyed hearing him sing because it missed the jokingly sung lyrics. It was great singing voice. The singing had made both of them sleepy eventually, and as they both said goodnight and hung up the phone, they laid in their beds deprived of their one muse once again. Did little George Davidson know that in the grass of his small front yard, a leaf blooms in small packed soiled, ready to live? Wilbur said texted George at 6 in the morning asking for his help. Wilbur, hello George. I do apologize if this text finds you so early in the morning, but I'd like to ask a favor. Are you busy today? George, it's no problem. I woke up early anyways, but no, I don't have any plans as far as I know. George was curious as to what the favor was. He thought it might have been an invitation for something at first, but how semi-serious Wilbur's tone was, he knew that wasn't the case. Are you good with kids? Oh no. I'm not horrible, I guess. Why? Would you be able to watch over Tommy? I know he can be a handful, but my family and I have found ourselves in a sort of emergency, and all the adults are needed. Is everything okay? Also, yes, I reckon I can watch Tommy. I'm going to be honest, I'm quite unsure. There's a lot going on right now. I've taken a work leave, and Techno's even closed the store for the rest of the week. I just hope, I just, we all just hope everything will be fine. Thank you for your concern. We appreciate it. We just hope everything will be fine. Thank you for your concern. We appreciate it. No problem. I hope everything turns out okay, whatever it is. But anyways, would you like to bring Tommy here, or should I go to yours? It's right if you come to ours. He's easier to take care of when he's entertained and out of your hair. All of your stuff he has to entertain is here. Yeah, sounds good. Can I be there in an hour? That works. Thank you again. We definitely owe you one. George plugged in his phone and he went to the kitchen to make himself a bowl of cereal, as if it was the fastest to make and eat. After that, he rushed to wash his face and change out of his pajamas. Finishing faster than he expected, he asked Wilbur if he could come earlier than he'd planned. Wilbur was actually convenient since he, Sally, and Techno were leaving soon. It took a couple turns in an attempt to find their house in the neighborhood, but after George spotted the painted numbers on the curbside, he parked on the side of the road before locking his car and knocking on the door. The house was decorated beautifully on the outside, with the roof lined with hanging flowers, a white archway on the path to the door, and wind chimes that sang together in the last of the warm summer wind blew on them. The door in the front of him opened, revealing sadly, George. She gave him a hug, surprising him, but he found himself hugging back. I'm sorry I was so last minute. George dropped his keys on accident and leaned to pick them up before looking to Sally. No, you've been great company to me lately. This is something I feel like I owe you. Oh, don't be silly, Sally smiled. You don't owe us anything for a friendship. Wilbur walked up behind her, carrying a small backpack of things. His eyes looked dreadful. They were baggy and dark, and the amount of hours he'd spent the previous nights could be determined by the face alone. George, good to see you, he greeted, patting him on the shoulder. Thanks for coming by so early. Tommy is up in his bedroom right now, still asleep. He wakes up in around 10 minutes. Wilbur gave Sally the backpack to load to the car, where Techno was already sitting staring at the wheel waiting for them. Wilbur led George inside, showing him where everything was kept, also where he had put Tommy's meals, which were prepared for George's convenience. He urged him not to hesitate to call if there was an emergency, and he could eat whatever he wanted in the kitchen if he should ever get hungry. That should be it. Oh, I missed the time. That should be it, Wilbur told him as he led George to the living room. The TV and the computer is all yours. The TV has a password lock on YouTube, since we found him finding content he shouldn't be watching. It's written on the back of the cable box. George was amused, wondering what in the world Tommy had found on YouTube which caused his family to restrict him from it permanently. Thank you, Wilbur. I think I can manage. When's his bedtime? Does he ever nap? Wilbur's eyes widened as he shook his head. We can never get him to nap, so we just make him sleep early. Hopefully we'll be back before he has to go to sleep, though. Sounds good, George notes. Whatever you guys are headed off to is well for you. And if everything turns out fine. Wilbur was getting teary-eyed, managing to get grin. We hope so too. I'll be off now. Make sure to double lock the doors. George nodded in understanding after Wilbur had walked out. He had locked both locks on the doors. He had footsteps coming from the stairs and found Toby, rubbing his eyes with nubby hands, and spotted George. Mom and Dad left already? Yes, George told him. You missed them, but they said goodbye while you slept. George nodded. Can I play computer? He asked, hopefully, but George had sadly said no. Your dad said you could after breakfast, but only for an hour. He lets he lets me after I finish worksheets too. Tommy let him know, and George nodded with a smile. He did mention that, yes. He then went to the kitchen to get him breakfast. What do you want to eat? Tommy made a thinking face. I want to mix every cereal we have in the kitchen. Dad never lets me do that. But if you let me, I won't tell him, Tommy said cheerfully, helping me get his way. George contemplated it for a second before deciding it'd be best to get on the kid's good side, in case it might help him if he got fussy later. Okay. Especially the one with the raisin. Tommy made a disgusted face. That's Mom's cereal, and it's except the one with the raisins. Tommy made a disgusted face. That's Mom's cereal, and it sucks. George chuckled. I'll make sure to skip that box then. Tommy sat down, finishing his last bites from Franken cereal before running to his room. Want to come? I can show you my cool house in Minecraft. George followed him, nearly slipping on the stairs because of his socks. Tommy led him to the bedroom, which had a door sign that read, Boys only, except for Mom. George laughed before heading inside the boys' room. He had many figurines and posters of various items he enjoyed. There was lots of Zelda posters, Animal Crossing ambios, and every Minecraft mob figurine sitting on the little shelf above his bed. Wow, you have every mob, George told him, impressed. I don't see a ghast, though. Tommy furrowed his brow. I do have a gas. Look, Tommy flicked off the lights in his room and pressed the button on a small remote, illuminating the lantern above his head, above his bed. The lantern was a gasp, and George had to admit it was quite awesome. Tommy turned on the lights again before booting up his computer. Someone bought me a computer. I don't know who it was, but Uncle Techno delivered it. George remembered Techno mentioning he would like to get Tommy a new computer after he spilled Coke on his old one. Maybe Uncle Techno got it. No, Tommy shook his head. He wouldn't. Tommy enjoyed George played Minecraft, and Tommy had even taught George how to call Tubbo so he could play with them. They argued a lot, but George could tell they were best friends, and no amount of conflict could be unresolved between them. Tommy had to go because his parents told Tubbo had to go because his parents told him he had to finish his math practice, which reminded George of Tommy's computer limit. You have 5 more minutes, he reminded the boy, who surprisingly nodded in agreement. Do you know where Mom and Dad went? Tommy asked. George shook his head. No. Oh, Tommy said. I do. They went to the doctor. Oh no, George said, concerned. Is everyone all right? Can I tell you a secret? Tommy asked, pausing his game and turning around to face George. Sure, kid. I get up at night to play computer when I'm supposed to be sleeping. I lock my door and Mom and Dad never see me. George laughed. You better not get caught doing that. Don't worry, I don't, the boy said confidently. Anyways, I was playing Minecraft at night and I heard everyone going crazy outside. I thought people came. Maybe my Aunt Alyssa had come to visit. I do like Aunt Alyssa. I peeked outside my room and saw my dad running downstairs. When I looked out the window, he was driving away. George didn't want to be nosy and use the boy to get knowledge from, but curiosity got the best of him. Where did he go? I think the doctor's. But I tiptoed outside, and Mom was on the couch, sad, and Dad and Grandpa were not there. Tommy said before turning off his computers. Do I have to do my worksheets now? George thought about what the boy had told him before, nodding his head. Yeah, you could play again after that. Okay, he looked disappointed, but made to finish his work anyways. He had helped Tommy sharpening his pencils when the phone had started to ring. It was Wilbur. Hey, Wilbur. Hey, George, Wilbur greeted. You being a good kid? Yes, he answered honestly. He's doing his worksheets now. Wow, it's hard for us to get him to do that. Good job, Wilbur laughed. Is everything okay? It is for now, Wilbur sounded relieved. I mean, the situation has been stabilized, but we're unsure. I'm glad it's fine for now. Can I speak with Tommy? Wilbur asked, and George said yes, handing Tommy the phone. He put the pencil down. Hi, Dad. Hello, Tommy. What'd you have for breakfast? Tommy's eyes widened. He looked at George. He had a smile on the face. I had cereal, Dad. Really, what kind? Tommy stuttered. The raisin ones. Oh, but you hate that cereal, Wilbur said skeptically. Sorry, I can't talk, Dad. I'm doing work, he said, while scrambling to hand the phone back to George. Did he mix every cereal? Wilbur asked George. Yes, George told him honestly. Wilbur started to laugh. Don't worry, at least now he's done it, he won't ask again. I have to go for now, but I think we should be back in an hour or two. That's what it's looking like. I was just checking in. Alright, bye, Wilbur. George ended the call. Tommy, your dad's gonna be back soon. Okay, Tommy looked up from his paper. Will Grandpa be back too? I don't know. He never mentioned if your grandpa would. Sorry, kid. Tommy nodded his head slowly. I like Grandpa. He showed me a lot of things, such as he showed me how to kickbox. He also showed me how to fight Uncle Techno, Tommy said proudly, flexing his little arms. He seems like a fun grandpa, George said, highly amused by the young child in front of him striking hero poses. He is, Tommy scribbled numbers into his math worksheet. He likes to tell me stories, too. I heard he likes telling stories. Wilbur and Tubbo's mentioning it. What did he tell? I know they're fake, but Dad believes them. He said he had evidence. Tommy did in air quotes. What does that word mean, George? It means proof. What's the word proof mean then? Tommy raised a brow. Never mind, George smiled. I'm done with my worksheets, but I'm hungry. Tommy stacked his papers before putting them in a little folder. Can I eat lunch early? George didn't see a problem with that. I suppose so. Come on. They went down to the kitchen, and George heated up Tommy's lunch. He also found another box of the same meal, with George, if you ever get hungry, written on a sticky note. He heated it up as well, and they both ate together. Dad plays music while we eat. Tommy gestured over to the shelf with Bluetooth speaker, records, and cassette tapes. Can you play Bruno Mars? George agreed, trying to connect his cell phone to the speaker. After a failed few attempts, he managed to play Bruno Mars on it. Tommy was drumming his hands on the table between bites, which George found amusing. He was some kid. Has it been an hour yet? Not yet. George checked his phone for the time. 15 more minutes. Time sucks. It goes by so slowly. Tommy crossed his arms. George had never agreed with a 6-year-old child more. Do you miss your mom and dad that bad? No, Tommy answered, and George almost spit out his food laughing. I mean, I do miss them, but I want to ask Dad for a new game. But he's back, that's all. Tommy had finished eating, and George made to wash their spoons and throw out the food boxes. Tommy told George to play Minecraft and call Tubbo again, and that George was allowed to watch TV in the living room if he wanted. George found that, in fact, Tommy bossed him around very amusing. He was a very outlandish child, he had decided to go upstairs with Tommy anyway, so when Wilbur and Sally came back, it didn't look like he was careless and left Tommy behind. A doorbell rang throughout the house, and Tommy told Tubbo he'd be back before meeting himself and running down to the door. He couldn't reach the second lock, so he gestured for George to hurry up and open it for him. Wilbur and Sally stood by the door, with Techno pulling out of the driveway. Sally gave Tommy a hug. Did you have fun? Yes, Tommy told her. I like George. He plays Minecraft. Sally looked at George proudly. I'm glad you had fun with Tommy. She sniffed the air. I assume you already ate then? That's good. Yes, I'm full, Mom. Tommy turned to his dad. Where's Grandpa? Is he still in the car? Oh no, Wilbur knelt down beside his son. Actually, Grandpa's gonna be staying at the doctor's now. No, 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 no. Why? Did you forget to eat apples? Sally gave a smile towards his son. No, Tommy. He just has to be with the doctors for now. But you know him. He's strong. He'll be back. He'll be back home to play with you again soon. Oh, okay, Tommy explained. If he's going to be back, then that's okay. He and his mom walked towards the bedroom. Sally went to check on the work that he'd done. Wilbur walked over to George, holding bills in hand. Wilbur waved away the money. No, please. You don't have to pay me. Wilbur gave him the money anyways. We owe it to you. George hesitantly took the money and pocketed it. Is your father okay? Wilbur let out a breath of air in his mouth, blowing his hair on the top of his head, slightly. We don't know. He's usually physically capable and healthy, but this came out of nowhere. He said he always saw it coming, though. The time's running out. George was a little saddened at the fact that his father could say such a thing. I can't promise anything, but I hope it passes and everything will be okay with him. I know you do, Wilbur said quietly. You should head home, George told him. I want to try and get some work done early. Wilbur thanked him again for taking care of Tommy and waved goodbye as he drove out. Who knew you'd be good with kids, Dream chuckled. It was nighttime, and they had been on the phone together again. What's that supposed to mean? I have a little sister, you know. I know, Dream smiled. I just didn't expect that, that's all. Well, I guess I expected it coming from you, Mr. I coached baseball for children, George mocked jokingly. Dream collapsed on his bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. Kids are cool, I guess. Some are, yeah, George responded, collapsing on his bed as well. So what did you do today? I drove out to my mom's again. It's far, but I drove back home anyways. What did you do there? I helped her organize her books. She has so many, she wants to sell them soon, Dream explained, turning to lay on his side. George played with his fingernails. That's a good way to make money. Yeah, Dream agreed. I missed you, George. Again, it's been a day. Yes, well, still, it's nice having someone to talk to after a long day, Dream admitted. George agreed. He did miss Dream as well. He wished he could hang out with him the way he hung out with Wilbur and his family, easily accessible. He wished his way for them to be closer, but their type of distance was different than normal. Dream, he exhaled. I completely missed you too. Dream smiled, putting them in another round of silence. Clay, he said after a while. What? My name, Dream said. It's Clay. George was surprised. He'd forgotten he never knew Dream's real name. He'd gotten so used to the nickname. Can I still call you Dream? Dream laughed. Of course you can, he admitted. I like the way you say it anyways. George felt flattered. Thank you, Dream. Dream closed his eyes, imagining a world where time had given them a chance. Dream finally came to accept that through calls, these talks, these little back and forth with George, had fallen for him. He had fallen for him. He'd fallen for him. It was subtle, but there, inevitably, when he'd finally get the chance to meet George, it'd be too late. Time would already be running out. He knew how to accept his feelings. He never suppressed or denied anything he'd felt before. Accepting his feelings to George had been easy, but accepting the fact that even if George reciprocated those feelings, it'd never work out was the most difficult thing he'd ever tried to do in his life. It was just, as people say, bad timing. He was angry at time. He wanted to torture it as it tortured him. He wanted to ask the universe why it had given him the best thing he'd ever had just to take every chance of ever having it away from him. He said goodnight to George so he wouldn't have to hear the voice he'd fallen in love with while his thoughts were filled with absolute and full of ache. He wished for one thing, and he wished he'd never have to long for the relief of his feelings for George to dissipate. George was confused at Dream's abrupt depart. He couldn't handle not hearing his voice anymore. They both laid in their own beds in their own time, in the same room of the same house, but so far away. While all of this, the wind was blowing, the single stem blooming from George's backyard, mockingly. The flower could survive, a young and beautiful from 1970, but time couldn't wait for Dream. The boy nicknamed Sapnap was Dream's closest friend. They had met in 1962 after school. Dream was sitting on a staircase, and Sapnap had just walked out of the gates, stuffing papers into his backpack. A page of his math homework flew, and the wind blowing it to where Dream sat. Sapnap quickly ran to the staircase, retrieving it when he spotted Dream, right next to where it had landed, crying into his arms. Are you alright? Sapnap asked the boy, who refused to look at him or show any indication that he had heard what he had said. I didn't even come here to bother you. I just wanted my paper back. Dream relieved himself in the vulnerable position, avoiding eye contact with Sapnap before picking up the piece of paper and handing it to him. Here you go, sorry. Sapnap retrieved the paper from Dream. He was about to walk away when he decided he didn't want to leave the boy crying on the staircase. Without at least knowing if he'd be able to get home safe. You don't look like you're doing too groovy, he stated the obvious, and Dream just stared in front of him, at the man clutching a bottle in his hand, yelling at a woman. Sapnap followed the sign of light, after realizing what Dream was staring at. He made a sound indicating he understood. Is that why you sighed? Who is that? Dream stayed quiet for long, wondering why this boy had been so interested in the situation. He was cynical and looking for a deeper reason as to why the boy cared so much and couldn't find any. My dad, Dream finally spoke, shooting lasers at the drunk man in the parking lot. Sapnap sat down next to him. Is the woman your mom? Yes, Dream responded, sniffling and wiping his eyes with the rough sleeve of his jacket. My dad is a right Fleabag to her. He doesn't hurt her, but he yells at her, and me. Mine is too. Sapnap put his leg up to his chest and wrapped his arm around him. My mom said it's because he's bugged out from the war. Dream's eyes widened. My mom tells me that too. He looked happy knowing he wasn't the only one in the current situation. Your dad fought in the war then? Yeah, Sapnap turned to the boy. He has a lot of medals and stuff. He doesn't let me touch them. My dad never got any awards. He gestured towards his father, who was leaning on his car while his mother was pinching her nose in annoyance. It's okay. He doesn't really deserve them. Sapnap caught sight of the white slug bug car and got up quickly. Oh no, I have to go, he told Dream, and who got up as well. Maybe we can talk more at school? Definitely. Dream held his hand. I'm Clay. I'm in Class B. Sapnap took his hand and shook it. My friends call me Sapnap, he introduced himself. I have to book it. But meet me here tomorrow after school again, he shouted and ran towards his car. Dream agreed and looked darkly to his parents in the parking lot. He was still afraid to go over them and encouraged them to drive him home already. But there was too much tension he felt he couldn't understand. He was walking towards them anyways, and he saw Sapnap running back towards him. My mom said she can give you a ride to my place. You dig? You could stay over for a bit too, he offered. Dream's eyes widened and enthusiastically. I love to. Thanks so much, Sapnap. No problem. I can show you my dad's medals too, he said excitedly, and walked over to his car. Do your parents mind? They don't really care if I go out, as long as I get back before it's dark. He looked over to them, still fighting, not noticing him walking over to with Sapnap to another car. I'd rather be someone else anyways. Don't worry, Sapnap patted his back. Consider us friends now. You can visit me anytime you want after this, and we can read my new comic, Sapnap said as he opened the car door for Dream, who got in and smiled. It was the first time he ever making a friend. With their close friendship, it made it impossible for Sapnap not to notice his friend looking dark and dreary lately. He'd offer visits to his house to talk over about whatever it was, but Dream always waved him off, saying it was no big deal. Jeepers creepers, you're scaring me, Clay. What's been bugging you? Jeepers creepers. It had been a normal situation. Dream would have told Sapnap everything. He could trust him with his life and knew he would give him the best advice, being the perfect balance of criticism, judgment, and comfort. He could tell his friend such problem. How could he tell his friend such problem though? How could he tell him that for the past 2 months he'd been in his room talking to a boy 50 years ahead of its time? Sapnap believed everything Dream said, but there was a line that this would definitely have crossed it. Another problem would be if he let out the cell phone calls details. He wasn't sure how Sapnap would react to him falling for another boy. Sapnap would have been supportive of everyone, but they were best friends, so he was scared as to what his reaction would be. So he just wanted to tell him. So as much as he wanted to tell him what was going on, he didn't really know where to start. Just the blue, Sapnap took a sip of soda and avoided his friend's eyes. It happens. You think I didn't notice that, man? Sapnap took the bottle of soda from him and put it down on the table. I mean, what is the reason for it? Dream fidgeted with his hands. Heartache was all he could let out from his mouth. Sapnap's mouth gaped open and he suddenly looked offended. Heartache, Sapnap bellowed loudly. You ever told me someone snatched your heart up and I find out because they broke it? Dream groaned and buried his face into his hand. I know, and I'm sorry, his voice was muffled. I was just scared of what you think. What I think? Sapnap sounded confused. You've told me about girls plenty of times before. Why are you scared now? That's the thing, Dream lifted his face. His heartbeat rapidly increasing as he hailed and looked his friend straight in the eye. It's not a girl, Sapnap. He exhaled and closed his eyes, almost protecting himself from a force that didn't exist. Sapnap took in the information, obviously surprised, but he calmed down and quickly sat closer to Dream. Without a breath, that's not what I expected, but it doesn't bother me. Did you think it would? Dream opened his eyes and shook his head quickly. No, of course not. I just thought it'd be different because you and I are best friends. And I was scared you look at me different. Sapnap laughed, and Dream was taken aback. Come on, man. You'll always be cocky, goofy Clay. Whatever kind of person snatches your heart can't change that. He definitely doesn't change what I think of you. Relief slowed through Dream's body as he wondered why he had not waited so long to tell Sapnap about the situation. He smiled. I'm not full of myself, by the way. You definitely are, Sapnap grinned. Who's the lucky guy? He knew Sapnap would ask that, and he didn't have the answer prepared. He thought about it for a moment. He doesn't live near here. Dang, that's rough. Sapnap empathized with him. Distance doesn't do anyone well. Is there a reason for the heartache? Yeah, Dream answered honestly, because it was the truth. The problem was indeed distance, but it was something Sapnap wasn't ready to hear about or try to understand quite yet. Maybe one day, but for now he wanted to keep the phone call a secret. Dream was staring at the vase of orchids in the corner of Sapnap's room. They were slowly withering, which bothered him because he wished Sapnap would take better care of them. And they were kept in a bad place, just sitting in the water, in the dark shadow of the room, where they belong in the soil and the sun. He realized that you can only have flowers away from where they're supposed to be for so long before they start to die. There's a place for them to live, to belong. That's the only way flowers could survive in time, if they'd stay where they're supposed to be. It was like him and George, they both had their places where they belong, and it's best if they stayed in them. He would love to have him close to him, but just like the flowers dying in Sapnap's face, he could only wait for so long before inevitably their chances would wither. Why was it so hard to move on then? It was easy. He loved George. He loved when George said he missed him too. He loved when George seemed so interested in his little anecdotes and the stories he'd never told anyone else. He loved when Dream would stop himself when he realized he was chewing too loudly over the phone. He loved George's voice and hesitation when Dream told him too much too fast. He loved his little chuckles and when he tried to hold back a laugh. He loved when the phone would only ring once before George would answer and say hello to him so quickly. There was so much to love about him, but he was better off being loved by someone who could be there, someone who could tell those little things to his face while holding him close, someone who could look him in the eyes and assure him when he felt like he was being lied to, someone who was from his time. That was just something Dream couldn't give him, and it killed him so much. Maybe he was so full of himself because he felt like George deserved him. George would subtly imply that Dream was the only one that he had understood or ever talked to with his full heart. He was surely full of himself for feeling he deserves George. There was only one thing that Dream could give him: his listening ear, his reassurance, his funny stories that would make his day. But that just wasn't enough. He couldn't have George, and he couldn't wait for him. Clay! Sapnap was waving his hands in front of Dream's face. Dream! Clay! Piss, baby! Dream snapped out of his thoughts, trying to hold back tears. You should really take care of those flowers, Sap. Fine, George thought. He'd gone outside and noticed the calendulas were slowly blooming, and a sense of relief took over his body, knowing that he wasn't a complete screw-up at gardening. He made a mental note to tell Dream about it later tonight. Then he remembered Dream had not called in the past week. His mind was filled with things that could have happened, all negatives. The worst scenario began with the reason that Dream had not visited him in 2020 because he lost his life before then. Maybe in 1970. These laws are sad as trying to think about something like the flowers really growing. Yeah, Dream can only call George. Don't spill anything, chat. No spoilers. No spoilers. He walked to the back of the house in the bedroom, trying not to meet eyes at the telephone because he'd only get worried again. Instead, he reached to the cell phone charging his desk when he saw missed texts. He unlocked the phone and read them. They were from Wilbur. George, good morning. Don't worry, I'm not asking you to babysit Tommy again. I actually wanted to see if you'd like to come over to dinner tonight. Last seat was actually reserved for my father, but he's at the hospital. Nonetheless, he insisted someone fill his seat because he didn't want to go to waste. George had not been to a proper dinner since he lived with the family in England. The ones he'd been to strictly business related with colleagues and talked mainly about work, so he didn't count this. Are you sure your father doesn't mind? Wilbur's bubble appeared right away. Well, he insisted, lol, so I assume not. I like that, then. Where and when? 6:30 at the Minx. The Minx? I love just Minx. Better get there at 6. George's eyes widened. The Minx had been the priciest restaurant in town. Even the wealthiest people George knew lived there couldn't afford eating there, maybe more than once or twice a year. I'll be there. FYI, there's a dress code. If you need a suit or anything, let me know. Pretty sure I could dig one up out of my closet. Thanks again, Wilbur. Don't sweat it, mate. See you there. George locked his phone and started to overthink. He calculated how long it would take for them to eat dinner, and it started at 6:30, waiting for the food. He definitely would not make it back in time for by 8 o'clock when Dream called. As much as it hurt him, he hoped Dream wouldn't call, at least not on the night that he wasn't home or waiting for it. He couldn't bring himself to decline Wilbur's offer. Reserving a seat at the Minx required a payment itself, and Wilbur's father himself, who was horribly sick, had said he did not want his seat to go to waste. So there's no way of saying no to Wilbur without it paining him. So he threw the clothes out of his closet one by one until he found a suit that was still intact enough to wear. He ironed it out until not a fold could be seen and dug into his drawer with a tie that went on it. It was a black suit with a small chain hanging from the front pocket. He paired it with a white collar button-up and black trousers with a belt. He had been too scared to wear it until the very last minute he had to go. He was clumsy and just knew he'd spill something on it. Once it hit 5:30, George put on the suit. He took a look at himself in a full-length mirror he'd never bothered looking at himself in, and not seen full of himself, but he looked like quite dapper and quite handsome. Thoughts then consumed his brain. He would have loved to have dreamed seeing him in something like this, especially since all outfits he had described himself wearing to dream had been casual and not interesting. He took one look at the phone, praying again that he wouldn't miss the phone call, and then once more the dream was okay. He made his way to the car and drove over to the Minx, which was perched on the top of the small hill and, to his dismay, had paid valet parking. He chose to park himself near the front so it was faster to get and he didn't have to pay for any. He must have been early because he had not seen any of the Soot family anywhere, so he sat down on one of the benches to wait for them. He watched the cars that would pass by, giving their keys to the valet parking worker, and walked towards the restaurant in their best clothing and jewels. He'd wonder what kind of lives they'd live and why they could afford to eat at such a place. Wives in their silkiest of dresses clutching to the arms of their husbands with the most bejeweled watches. He wondered how happy they could be with all that money. George busied himself with observing until he got to the third car in the valet line, where two brothers stepped out, one with wife and kid. It was the Wilbur and his family, looking fancier than they'd ever seen them before. He couldn't even fathom the cost of Sally's dress, which sparkled in the last of the sun before it set, and she was helped out the car by Wilbur, who was looking great himself. Techno had appeared, took on a haircut, and even Tommy was in a suit acting on his best behavior. Wilbur handed the keys to the valet man and led his family over to the revolving door where George sat. "George," Wilbur greeted excitedly, giving him a hug. "Looking fresh, mate. Have you gone inside yet?" "No." George played with the sleeve of his white button-up, that was exposed under his black suit. "I was waiting for you guys, actually." "Oh well then, let's go in," Wilbur suggested, but Tommy was already ahead of them, playing with the revolving door. Sally made her way to get him to stop, but ended up having to chase him through the spinning door on a different panel as he laughed and kept the door spinning. George walked in after Tommy and Sally and had finished their hilarious chase around the door. The restaurant looked like a mini cathedral with paintings of angels and such beautiful scenery surrounding him. The chandeliers held real wax candles that illuminated the restaurant in the most perfect way, leaving his face a yellowish gold. Wilbur spoke with one of the people in the reservation lector, who nodded at him continuously before checking his book for Wilbur's name. After a while, Wilbur gestured for them to follow the man to the table, which was a circular with a white tablecloth and a spinning glass circle within it for food. After the party had sat down, the waiter informed them that he'd be back in a bit to ask them what drinks they'd like. "This place is cool, but it looks old, Dad," Tommy said as he played with the handkerchief on the plate, which was folded into a swan. "That's because it is old. It's been up since 1916, Wilbur informed his son, who insisted of being impressed, looked disappointed, and then had been in older place. Tommy continued fidgeting with the handkerchief, making Sally laugh as she hugged him from the side. Techno casually looked over the menu. "Thank you again, Wilbur," George said from the side of the table from him. "This must have cost a fortune." Wilbur laughed and shook his head. "Oh no. It was paid for by an old friend of my dad. He co-owns this restaurant, and after hearing Dad was in Florida, he offered to treat us to dinner. Of course, Dad couldn't come, said he was quite sad about it, but made us keep the reservation anyways. I call him Mr. Halo," Tommy said to George, "because one time I was playing with my food, and I flung an onion ring on his head. Dad said Techno. Uncle Techno said it looked like a halo." Techno sniggered from behind the menu, and the rest of the family looked over to him. "So you're the reason Tommy calls him that," Sally asked while staring down at him. Techno put his hands up. "Look, he's a cool guy, didn't mind." He tried explaining himself, but Sally was shaking her head, though George caught her smiling. "Anyway," Wilbur continued, "yes, this really didn't cost us, so you definitely don't owe us." The waiter came by asking what they wanted to order. It was all you can eat restaurant, since it was the seats you had to pay for, so George didn't have to go looking for the cheapest stuff on the menu. He ordered a steak with some gourmet mashed potatoes, vegetables, and soup on the side. Everyone told the waiter their orders. Sally ordered Tommy before the waiter walked away, and they waited for their food. They immersed themselves in conversation. They talked about their childhood jobs, and what they enjoyed doing in their free time. A couple of the conversations were fit in before the waiter came back with the food, which was placed beautifully and smelled amazing. George's mouth watered as he cut into the steak before he took a bite. It was perfect. The Soot family have obviously eaten here before, because they seemed so used to the ornate decorations and skillful cooking of their meals. George continued to eat, embarrassingly faster than everyone else at the table, who didn't seem to mind. Dream sat at the phone, digging into his hair. It was 8:57. He knew he waited to call George because he put it off for over a week. He felt selfish, because he knew George had probably been worried and lonely, because Dream had not called just to benefit himself. It was a simple, can't live without you, but can't live with you, but can't live without you. He couldn't live with talking to George any longer. Knowing he could never have him. But he couldn't live without the comfort and happiness George brought to him that no one had done it in a while. But tonight he wanted to explain. He wanted to tell George how he felt, and he wanted to say sorry. This had to be the last phone call. If he wanted to hear anything for the first time, it had to be George loved him back. Even if it was the last time he knew he wanted to hear at least once. He took the pen and scribbled in a little notebook. September 8th, 2020. To him I say I love you and goodbye. He dialed the phone and waited George's usual quick answer, but nothing came. He called over and over again, but did the same result. He immediately knew he messed up not calling George. He must have been angry and dodging the calls for now. He started banging his fist on the table, crying. He was lost and on what to do. He was even more lost on how he felt. He knew this would hurt George, yet he's still doing to save his own feelings. But he wasn't just saving his own feelings, he was saving George too. He was making sure George would move on. If George felt the same way, continuing the calls and falling for each other more and more would make it worse for both of them. This was the right decision. He knew he wrote what he was about to write. There was no turning back. He glanced at the sketch of George on his wall, clicking the pen and starting to write in the last page of the notebook. To my next of kin, a friend, whoever I pass these notes to, I know I have much to ask you, but can you make one last request? On September 9th, 1920, 9:30 a.m., I'd like you to. Wilbur and Techno's phones had been vibrating simultaneously. Wilbur picked up his phone. Hello? Wilbur listened to the speaker on the end before getting quickly. Oh shoot, he wiped his mouth with a handkerchief. Sally, I would go. It's Dad. There's an emergency. Stay here and eat, he told them, still on the phone. Wait, Will, I'll go with you, Techno said as he got up, taking one last french fry and eating it. The valet will take forever. Wilbur was on the phone. He wants to see who? Wilbur. George, I'm sorry. But do you think you can take us? George was done eating. He looked at the frantic brothers, wanting to help. Of course, I didn't park valet. I can take you guys wherever you need to go. It'll be faster to get my car, he agreed. And Wilbur ended the phone call. We ran out of the restaurant to George's car. It was 8:30. When they reached the hospital, and Wilbur frantically asked the nurse to visit Dad, they led down the furthest hallway where George was. George let the two brothers have some privacy in there and didn't know what was going on. After 10 minutes, Wilbur and Techno walked out of the room, a bit weary. Wilbur. George got up and walked to him. Is everything all right? He seized up, but for now is stabilized, he informed him. He wants to see you, George, Wilbur finally said, scratching the back of his head, where hair lay frizzed up from the running. Me? George looked confused. Why me? Wilbur shrugged sadly. Thank you for bringing us here. Oh, George responded. Yeah, I can do that, yeah. Wilbur nodded and let George into his room. He took out his usual pocket notebook and started flipping through it when he reached the last page and made a face. He looked like he read something that wasn't written there before walking out of the room, leaving George and his father. The old man lay on the bed, IV tubes sticking out of his arms, constant sound of beeping surrounding area. George wondered why he never went crazy. The man stared at him for a few moments, opening his mouth to talk, but nothing came out. George walked over slowly and awkwardly before taking a seat in the small chair beside the hospital bed. Hello, sir. The man continued to stare at him, slightly shaking. George didn't know if the man had trouble talking or if it was for other reasons, but he felt awkward and didn't know if he should say something else. The silence continued for what felt like forever, before the man finally spoke with a raspy, shaky voice. Hello, young man. Hi. George looked at him. I'm a friend of your son's. Oh yes, they've mentioned you before. The old man nodded. Slowly, his eyes squinted at him. I just want to thank you for the things you've done for them. George shook his head with a smile. Oh, they've done more for me than I have for them, trust me. The man kept nodding slowly. They put their hand, but then both were put into another slow-moving silence. George was about to say goodbye when the man stopped him. Do you know what the date is, young man? George raised his eyebrows before getting his cell phone checking the date. September 8th, sir. 8th September already. How could I be so predictable? Wilbur's father said softly with a small laugh. What was that, sir? George politely asked the old man to repeat himself, but he shook his head, indicating he was talking to himself. George got up slowly. Well, it's nice talking to you, sir, but I'm sure you'd like to speak with your family again. He slowly goodbye. Okay, George had his hand on the doorknob, about to open it when the old man raised his voice a little. He called. George turned around. Pardon? He called you today, but you didn't answer. George's eyes widened as he started to shake and heartbeat increased. Could man be talking about the phone call? I'm sorry, sir, George managed to say, but I don't know what you're speaking about. You know damn well what I'm talking about. He pointed a finger at George. George started to walk towards him, sitting in the chair. George was confused and scared at the same time. His breath caught in his throat a few times, and he started to have he had to cough to remember to breathe. Breathe, young man, Wilbur's father urged as he sat down slowly and carefully. George did so. Farley brought himself to face him. You know about the phone calls? George stuttered in his own words, confused, highly amused by the old man in front of him. The old man chuckled. Of course I know about the phone calls. Are you friends with Clay? George asked, using Dream's real name in case the man never knew about the nickname. Clay. Man started the boy who locked himself in his room every night just to talk to someone on the phone. George said the first assumption that came to his mind. Are you Sapnap? The man jumped at the mention of the name, looking at George, shaking his head slowly. Sap died in March. Oh, I'm so sorry, was all George managed to say. Who are you then? No. The silence was again the loudest silence George ever sit through in his entire life. He tried to shake with the anxiety of person knowledge of him and Dream's phone call. I'm an old man, George. He stared deep into George's eyes, so deep he could feel his corneas being cut. You called me that yourself. George started to nod before what the man had said sink in. His eyes widened, his chest pounded violently as his breath was running out of his throat quicker than he could manage. He looked at the man and then saw familiar green eyes. The eyes in the photo of the man he kept on his desk, a man smiling while holding a cap. Dream, he sputtered, it's you? Talking felt like an earthquake from how much shaking was going on inside of his voice, his throat. Drew smiled. Oh, so aged eyes filling with tears. How are those flowers, George? George let out a sob before stuffing his face into his hands. All of the worries seemed to subside slowly. Dream was alive, but were they growing all right? Dream asked again about the flowers. George nodded, wiping his eyes. The stem's out now. Dream looked reminiscent. After all, George's events were in a span of a few weeks, while for him it's been 50 years. Do you remember why you didn't call this week? George asked bravely, and Dream nodded. I do. George wanted answers. Can you tell me, Dream, please? I was young, George. Obviously, I'm not anymore. But the me you're talking to is still young and naive and confused. Dream began, trying his best to hold back emotions, immediately failing. Why was he? George tried to level to the man, but couldn't understand. Dream put off the question. He was stupid at the time, but he knew how he felt. George fixed himself on the couch. How did he feel? Do you love him, George? Dream asked suddenly, and George's eyes widened. He knew he had felt some sort of emotion or pull towards Dream, but he never took the time to think about what it was. All those times he changed the whole routine to fit Dream's phone call. All those times he stared at the handprints on the wall and wondered what it would feel like if they were made together. He knew how he felt, he just couldn't name it. All this time he couldn't bring himself to say he was in love. George couldn't help but notice Dream referring to his past self as though he was a different person. Why do you call himself him? Dream nodded, tears filling his eyes slowly. To answer your question, George, I'd be answering all of your other ones. George nodded, awaiting what Dream had to say. He and I are different people, began. Maybe not literally, but emotionally we're in different stages of our lives. I was young, George. Young and in love with you! George jumped a bit hearing that, getting chills. He continued to listen, but also realistic. I knew I couldn't be in love with you, he explained. I saw vases of flowers in Sapnap house. They sat in the water, dying and cold. They meant to be in the sun, to grow and live. George sat up, unsure where Dream was going. They had their own place, and they were meant to stay. Yes, maybe a couple days earlier, the flowers looked beautiful in the vase, but after a while, they started to crumble. That's what happens when things don't stay where they're supposed to stay, Dream said. What does that have to do with you and me? The flowers are you and me, Dream elaborated. We're meant to stay in our own place. We can't get caught up trying to live in someone else's. Dream had taken it in. He didn't know what Dream had been feeling lately. George, yes, Dream. My heart couldn't be in 2020. It belonged in 1970, was all Dream said. The line shattered George's heart to pieces, but Dream wasn't done. I wanted you to move on, George. I know I don't have much time here. I feel like I'm gonna die tomorrow. Don't say that, George snapped. It's true, George. Look what happened when I moved on. You saw what happened. You've met my beautiful family, and I love them. That's the life I was given because I knew it, and normally we would never have worked. It was you I loved, George, and there was no doubt about that. But it couldn't have happened. Dream scolded, and he exhaled, almost apologetically. I could still talk to you on the phone, over the phone, Dream. You can't. Tomorrow's the 9th of September, George. I made sure I couldn't call you again. What do you mean you made sure, George? I did what I did to save you, to help you move on. You know deep down we were never meant to happen. Dream started coughing, and the beeping of the monitor started to increase. George was frantic. Nurse. Dream, you were my flower, George said. He knew it was cheesy, but there was no other way to say how he felt. You said it yourself. Flowers from 1970 couldn't survive that long. He heard footsteps running towards the room. He backed away as doctors filled the area around Dream's hospital bed. Dream gave him one last look. Take care of those flowers, wrong number, he said. George's view of him became obscured by nurses. Clay Soot, also known as Dream, by his closest companions, died on September 8th, 2020, 9:59 p.m. at 71 years old. His polite request for George to take care of the flowers were his last kind words. He was capable of talking after that. He just refused to say anymore because he wanted his last words to have something to do with George. He was capable of talking after that. He just refused to say anymore because he wanted. Yep, I already read that. It was Wilbur who broke the news to George over the text the next day, assuring him it wasn't his fault of any, and that Dream himself knew his time was running out. George didn't know how to bring himself to talk to Dream over the phone, knowing his future counterpart had lost his life. So he remembered what Clay had told him the night before he died. You can't. Tomorrow's the 9th of September, George. I made sure you couldn't call again. George was trying to understand what that meant, but he knew he was going to sit for however long it took just to wait for the phone to ring. He had to keep the fact that he died to himself. He needed to hear Dream's voice again, the dream he loved, the dream that was alive. George was so busy and thought that he heard knocking from downstairs. It took everything in him to get up and push himself down the stairs, not to mention the fact that he had not eaten breakfast. Yes, he opened the door to Wilbur with baggy eyes that were scarred from too much wiping. Wilbur, George let him inside. I'm so sorry, George. Can you finish last sentence without getting choked with tears? Wilbur tried his best to smile. Don't be, it's not your fault. George couldn't fathom how much grief him and his family were probably in. His heartbreak came back and thought of Tommy, how Tommy was expecting his grandma to come back. Couldn't imagine how hard it was for Wilbur and his father to sit down and tell him the truth. He had just gotten close to. George helped the man walk inside. Why'd you come here, George? Just let me get over it. I have to tell you something, George. He turned to George, trying to keep his best composure, but obviously backfiring. Sure, anything. George sat down in front of him, offered him a glass of water and some tissues, patting him on the back. Wilbur thanked him before taking a deep breath. My dad was a great man. His voice shook. Every bit of him was slowly crumbling into sandcastle, had millions of hands that were trying to keep it together. George nodded. Wilbur had no idea how much he agreed with him. He listened on, taking a sip of water and trying to calm, knowing what Wilbur was about to say, something about the man he loved, the man who was gone. He'd tell stories, I remember. Wilbur laughed a little. They were such absurd stories, but I believed them. Techno didn't. He was a realist. But me? Well, I soaked up every word of his storytelling until I fell asleep. He looked reminiscently in front of him. The stupid one about him climbing into a tree to protest not cutting it down. How he was struck by lightning after. All those times, he and his friend Sapnap would go out and set firecrackers into the sky at helicopters. George chuckled at him. He wondered how insane things Dream was supposedly did in his life. The thought of it warmed and eased him a bit. He knew that Dream was satisfied and had lived his life the way he wanted. There was a story for every single night. He loved telling those stories as much as he loved hearing them. Well, I did love hearing them. I loved every single one of them. Will's fingers were more fidgety than usual. But there's one particular one that he'd have so much to talk about. George was genuinely interested. And what story was that? The story of a boy he used to speak to over the phone. George felt his heartbeat stop for a second. Dream told his kids about him. More importantly, Wilbur knew about the calls this whole time. Wilbur didn't wait for a response. The way he'd tell the stories felt so real. I just knew he wasn't lying to me. He never did. Then what? Then I grew up, of course. I stopped believing Santa, then Tooth Fairy, and eventually all Dad's stories. Wilbur locked in his hands, playing with his rings. He glanced at the clock, hurried his speech. Met a woman, got married, had a kid, and he knew that. He knew I wasn't Liz's boy and awe everything he did and more. Wilbur moved closer. Every ounce of his body wanted to hear what Wilbur had to say. Then 5 years ago, he came here. Wilbur was gesturing in his hands. And he told me, Wilby, do you remember the stories I used to tell you? I said, of course I did. Then he told me that's why he came. I was confused. Why would he visit me and ask me if I remember one of his fictional stories? Wilbur sat in silence for a bit, constantly sniffling and blowing into the tissue. He told me he was telling the truth. This story was true. Wilbur started messing with his sleep. He thought I was crazy. He thought I was going to kick him out of the house, but he wouldn't budge. I was going to kick him out of the... He was so persistent. Yep, Wilbur knew. Of course he did. Wilbur patted his pockets and took out this old, worn leather notebook. He threw that to me before I closed the door at him. He said it was proof he was telling the truth. He opened the page to show George a series of dates with little notes on the sides. George unburies a time capsule. George repaints the exterior of the house dark gray. I chose that color. George unburies another time capsule. George plants flowers. I know him well enough to know he'll struggle. George now knew the reason Wilbur kept this notebook so close to him, why he'd wrote it when he was with George. Wilbur took the notebook. This one's my favorite, he showed George. September 2nd, 2020. I forgot to call George today. Whoever this goes to, please keep him company. Is that why you came to my house with apple cider? Yes, he confirmed. I wasn't initially going to fact check these dates, but I felt bad for him, so I went on the day you unburied time capsule, and there you were. I went more and more inside each date. Event he wrote down. He was telling the truth. George felt his heart warm. Even though Dream had never visited him before, he was always there for him while the whole time without him noticing in little ways with him nonetheless. May I see the phone, George? Oh, George said. It's upstairs in my room. George led Wilbur up to the carpet steps to his bedroom. It was messy and he didn't have the energy to clean lately, so he was a bit embarrassed, but Wilbur didn't seem to mind. Wilbur kept constantly checking the clock. It was 9:21. I have somewhere to be. I grew in a bit of havoc of checking time. 9:24. The phone rang. Is that him? Wilbur asked. George ran to the phone, longing to hear Dream's voice, longing to talk to him, longing to know that some version of him was still alive. Didn't consider morning. Dream never called in the morning. I don't think I should talk to him. Wilbur said truthfully. I don't know if I can bring myself to. Might just mess things up, right? George not quickly at Wilbur. Dream. Hi, George. Dream was silent for a moment. Remember the handprint I put on the wall? How you freaked out? I asked if you held it. How I feel, Dream? What are you talking about? He didn't care if Wilbur was in the room. He talked as if it was just him and Dream in the room. You falter, Dreams continued. When I say something that goes a little too far, when I call you adorable, when I tell you I miss you. Dream, can you just cut this and get to the point? George snapped, and Dream's breath caught for a moment. So he wasn't expecting this kind of reaction from George. George, I love you, he said. I love your voice. I love how absolutely dense you are sometimes, even though you're one of the smartest people I know. The way you answer the phone so fast when I call, I love the hello, Dreams. And the good night, old man. And even I love how stupidly long you take to say I miss me back. Shoot, I love when you tell me I'm full of myself and how much you want me to shut up. But listen, George, I don't want to shut up. I don't want to stop talking to you. George held the phone to his feeble, unsteady hands, and his eyes glossed with a layer of salty tears. And I just want you to love me back. I don't care if you say I'm full of myself. I know you love me back. So please, George, I need to hear you say it at least once. I know you'll meet it, so get this over with. George's eyebrows furrowed. Get this over with, George repeated. Is that what you think this is? You're trying to coax me into telling you I love you. Just get it over with. You don't understand what I did, George. Calm down. If you don't say it now, you'll never get another chance to. What are you talking about? What is this? Why did you call me? Just tell me this. George was full of emotion between watching Dream and his last moments in life and being on the phone with the past self, pouring his heart out. He didn't know how to feel. You wanted me to tell you I love you. No, you don't. You want me to say I don't? George wasn't being sappy. He was sassy. He was generally confused. Can you do that, Dream pushed? Can you handle saying that? Which one of those two phrases would be true? And would you tell me a lie if you told them to me right now? George was silent. Please, George, I need to hear it. All George could remember arguing with Dream in the hospital the night before. He had told him no matter what, he would still find a way to talk to him on the phone. It was the first and last memory of seeing Dream in person in an argument. He wanted an argument with Dream, so he collapsed. I love you too, Dream. Dream sniffed, his voice uneven. Thank you. That's what I need to hear, George. You need me to tell you I love you? Dream didn't answer. He sat on a stool, clutching his phone so hard he thought he might crack it to pieces. I need closure, he admitted. Proof that once upon a time in 1970, George Davison, a man who didn't even exist yet, had loved me. How are we going to continue after this? George asked curiously. Now we know how we feel. I'm sorry, George. A single tear. Dream's face. It's funny. They say time heals wounds, but how time can be one to create them. George felt a breath catch in his throat after hearing that. What's going on? 9:30. Wilbur came up behind George. George had forgotten he was even there. George, I want to say one thing, and that's thank you. Dream's voice was so broken that George found something off-putting about it. Thank you for the late night talks, the stories you tell, and everything. You changed my life, that's sure. I just can't have my heart in 1920 when it belongs here in 1970. I fall for you more, and I go even deeper. I won't be able to get out of it. Maybe another life, you and I were together, happily, the way I want it to be. That's the way it should be. But it's just. Dream stopped talking for a moment, giving himself time to cry. Bad timing, he finished. George was not only crying as well, but he was confused. Did that mean Dream would never talk to him? Why would he do such a cruel thing? He didn't know he'd witness him die, and now this. Dream, what does this mean? I love you. Dream interrupted. I love you too, but that's all that needs to be said. Dream, stop talking. Take good care of the flowers, George. George, I'm sorry, but this is his last request of me. The explanation was what he got him when he pulled the red Swiss Army knife. No. We'll meet again. Wilbur, what are you? George raised wrestling the phone with Wilbur. Wilbur one grabbed the hold of his phone, clutching his strong, shaking hand. Slash, he cut the cord. Phone fell with a clang on the floor, and any more calls a Dream. Dream stood in the stool he knew the moment the cord was cut. The tone dial rang loudly, hitting his ears, kept the phone pretty close to him. He was waiting for one more word, but nothing came. He held the phone the way he held it when he talked to George. George fell to the ground, holding the phone. Why did you do that? He wailed, desperately putting the pieces of the cord back together, but there was no hope. Wilbur didn't falter or back away. He just ripped the last page of the notebook and handed it to George, whose tears fell down it, blotting the ink slightly. To my next kin, a friend, whoever passed the notes to, I know I have asked so much from you, but I make one last request. On September 9th, 2020, 9:30 a.m., I'd like you to please sever my telephone connection with George permanently. Tell him I hope he moves on. Other worlds will give him everything he deserves. Someone to love him, to hold him, to tell him how beautiful he is. This is the end of my requests. I choose whoever chooses to fulfill them. I want you to say thank you and have a beautiful day. George read the note over and over. Dream had no idea what he had just done to him. George had seen Dream die twice today. Any version of him and any connection with him was gone forever. Wilbur held his friend up and let him cry, comforting him. They had both lost a lot that day. Orange petal of the Candelius outside peeked out of the dirt. It was just beginning to live. I had no idea how much it just died. Clay had finally put down the phone. He never touched it and avoided looking at it again. He just couldn't bring himself to it. He'd moved out of his home shortly after. He'd done so many times before settling to England. He found a lovely woman named Ophelia, whom he married. A couple eventually expected their first child. Unsure on the name until Ophelia found a sticky note with Wilbur scrawled on it. She asked Clay what the word meant, and he denied any knowledge of what it meant or where it came from. After some convincing, Clay agreed to the first child, Wilbur. Wilbur grew up happy childhood with loving parents who gave him everything he ever wanted or needed. Clay would tell him bedtime stories every night. Sometimes Nick would come by and share tales too. A few years after Ophelia was expecting another son, around the same time, Clay's friend Techno had lost his long fight battling cancer. Clay's second child was nicknamed Techno in his memory. Clay continued to keep his notebook of dates near here, planning to go visit George Daving himself, but couldn't bring himself to. So he turned to the person who would believe him, Wilbur. He continued to live a good full life, but never forgetting the boy he spoke to over the phone. George stared at the handprints wall every night for weeks on end until he noticed something written underneath them. I love you, it read. He placed his hand on top of Dream's handprint and crumbled, listening to unclaimed melody until he fell asleep every night, taking the words and cursing time. Well, my love, my darling, I hunger for your touch. And time slowly goes by, and time can do so much more. Are you still mine? I need your love. All he heard was Dream's voice. The young photo of Clay laid on his desk, framed and untouched. After he realized what Dream did wasn't selfish, and it was an act of love. It was cliche, if you loved them, let go, and Dream was let go. Eventually, he'd gone outside for the first time in over a month. He smelled the fresh air and remembered the last request Dream ever made was to live his life, and so he did. There was no explanation or answers to why that day, on July 20th, both in 1970 and 1920, a phone call had been so powerful enough to break time. Neither Dream or George had gone looking for any or told anyone. The phone calls, however, unexplainably and impossible. All of their contexts were their little secrets. Calls defined every law of that day, space-time. There was no match for how much changed two young men's lives. The connection of those two hearts was stronger than the magic that brought them together. So, however painful and tragic the end of the story may come to, you now know once upon a time, in the same room, in the same house, 50 years apart, Clay and George loved each other.